Welcome, everybody, to a new edition of Let's Do Lunch. Today is Friday, which is always our Business of Music Day, and we have a terrific show today, which I'll introduce in just a minute. But first, let me invite you all to introduce yourselves. Please go to the chat on the bottom nav, select on the drop down everyone so that everyone can see your posts. And tell us who's here. We'd love to know who's in the house, and you're welcome to drop in a LinkedIn or whatever places people can meet you. And then you can use the chat as a place to make comments and connect with people during the show today. If you do have questions specifically for the panel, please put those in the Q&A area, which is just to the left of the chat on the bottom nav. This session today was put together by our really good friends over at Tipalti, and going to learn a little bit about them in the show together. They're really innovative company and a leader in the music royalty space. And that's what the topic is going to be about today as well. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. Evan Hebe. Evan is Senior Manager, Partner in Industry Marketing for Tipalti. Evan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ned. Much appreciated. Great to be here.
Great to have you here. And Paul Reskinoff. Paul is founder and publisher of Digital Music News. Paul, great to have you on the show.
Good to be here.
And our moderator today is Seth Schachtner. Seth is a longtime music executive, and he's now managing director of Strat America. Welcome, Seth.
Thanks, Ned. Great to be here. Okay, folks, let's take it away here. I'm Seth Schachtner. I'm a digital music consultant. My background includes Sony Music in Latin America. And my voice is a little bit off today from a lot of talking this week, but it'll warm up as we go through with this. Why don't we just kick off, a brief bit of tiniest bit of intros. Maybe Evan, you can tell us a little bit what you do, at Tipalti, and Paul as well, and then we're going to kick into the main core of the content.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Seth. Yeah. Again, name is Evan Hebe. I run industry and partner marketing at Tipalti, and what that really means is that I'm responsible for really evangelizing Tipalti in the verticals that we're a really great fit for. Music being one of the emerging industries that we have lots of really cool clients in. Some of the clients you might have heard of are like DistroKid, Splice, Go Digital Media, Creative Music based out in Los Angeles. So lots of AudioMac in New York. So lots of companies in the music space, and it's an area that we want to support. We know that payments are super, super complicated when it comes to royalties and disbursements, and that's something that Tipalti can simplify. My whole career, I've really spent in the fintech industry. So previously I worked at a company called NetSuite, which many of you might have heard of. It's a leading cloud accounting and ERP software. And since moving over to Tipalti about 2 years ago, I've really shifted my focus on companies with a digital first model. So companies like a few of those that I had mentioned that have models that have really complicated ways of working with their partners, working with their vendors, working with their suppliers. And we like to joke at Tipalti, the more complicated your payment structure, the better it is for us because we know how to handle complex. And if you didn't know, the word Tipalti actually in Hebrew means I handled it. So that's really the mantra of our company and our business as a whole is we'll handle your complex payment needs, whatever they may be.
Cool, good to hear.
Nice.
Paul.
Good, Evan. I didn't know that Tipalti meant I handled it. Okay, good. I'm going to start using that with my wife when she asks me to do things. Hey, Tipalti, yeah. But so I'm a publisher of Digital Music News, and we cover the craziness of the music industry. If you've been in the business for a while, you likely know about us. If you're new to the industry, then I hope you'll check out Digital Music News. This business is changing daily, so we try to just stay on top of it.
Cool. So yeah, Tipalti will come in handy for me as well, as we get closer to the holidays. So thank you for sharing that, Evan. So let's do some, I want to do kind of maybe the softball, if you will, the top level, because I think there's actually a ton of exciting stuff happening in digital music. it's been a few months since I think we've done one of these sessions, but maybe Paul, this kind of one for you because you're sitting there in front of all the news feeds. But I mean, at least the recorded side of the music industry, which some still regard as perhaps the heart, perhaps the center of it, at least internationally and globally, announced some really impressive results. I think the industry clearly seems to be recovering. I mean, any sense is it all about streaming driving that, or what's happening, and why are those revenues getting pumped up so much?
Yeah, that's been the biggest driver of recording surge of late. Even 5 years ago, people didn't even know what was going to really become of the recording in terms of how it fit into the food chain of the music business. But yeah, it's been revalued and it's roaring back. And you now have Universal Music Group, one of the most valuable companies on the planet. You have billionaires turned overnight. So it's been great stuff. If you have any interest in recordings, or you've had any control over IP and recordings, it's been a good story for the business.
Yeah, and it's both. It's not just from what I read, just the premium subscription streaming, the advertising business and streaming, the ad supported is actually showing a lot of pretty strong growth globally as well. It's not just a US story, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, that's been also a sort of an emerging new area for growth, right? Because the consideration previously was that freemium or ad supported didn't really support enough. And to extent that's true, because in a lot of cases, when it's only ad supported, there just isn't enough revenue. And if you look at premium versus ad supported, the seesaw just goes like that really quickly. But now it's getting the game around ad supported is getting a lot better. So there's a lot more money being generated around it. In emerging markets, it's becoming a lot more important. And there are even entrepreneurs and companies focusing on ad supported entirely. So yeah, this is going to be a new growth area.
Yeah, I know companies like Trebell are out there looking at sort of the free model, and it's interesting to hear it because I think the global piece of the ad business wasn't always so supportive of the ecosystem. It seemed like there was a lot of lagging markets, emerging markets, basically. So it feels like they're catching up a bit.
Yeah, and it's funny you raised that, because when it comes to the first world versus emerging, all that breakout, you're starting to see a lot of maturity happening in a lot of the bigger, richer markets like the US and Europe and that sort of thing. So almost out of necessity, the ad-supported market has to be developed more in emerging markets. It's just there isn't as much bang to the buck on the premium side there.
Yeah, but what either of you? I mean, there just seems to be tons of press constantly around our business, but anything you see is like the most exciting part of the business is starting to flower and pop up now?
Yeah, well, I've just been dominating. So Evan, you have anything you want to throw in there?
Yeah, no, I can add in for sure. One of the areas that we found is really, really interesting, me personally and Tipalti in general, is around how music can really cross over into some of the other areas, some other industries that we're talking about. So one of the things that's been a topic is around the gaming industry. So if you think about like a place like Fortnite, where you can host concerts, and you've seen people like Travis Scott do that previously. Obviously, he's had some bad press around him and some difficult circumstances lately, but really when that had happened, he was at the forefront of being one of the first people to host a concert on a gaming platform. So really expanding an artist's audience in a really natural way, in an authentic way, by connecting with other areas that the users or the listeners might be interested in. So I'm really finding it interesting to see music, as it always does, really affect many, many verticals and industries, but particularly in gaming. How are artists being able to, cross over into the gaming world? What are the implications in the metaverse? Are we going to start seeing more and more concerts like that popping up in the metaverse? And is it just an application for artists that have an appeal to younger audiences, or is it an application that has appeal to maybe older generations that aren't as apt to go out to concerts? Maybe they don't want their ears buzzing for the next 3 days because they're at a concert that was super loud, and they'd prefer to sit at home, stream it on their Apple TV and watch it. So that's something that I've found really, really interesting, is kind of the crossover, and how music, as it always does, like I said, really seeps into some of the other critical areas of what's hot in the news, and gaming is certainly at the forefront of the news all the time.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, the metaverse and Web3, if it feels like it's got some game-changing aspects to it yet. It also feels to me, just looking at some of the Roblox being one example. We've had them come in and talk about what they're doing, but just in general, the idea of it just aggregating audiences with artists. You don't need necessarily a label or a traditional talent agency. There might be other interests that come together. Even just the product mix, right? Like, you don't actually need a band. You could just show up as avatars essentially. And it does feel a little closer to the gaming world to me. I don't know if you buy into the rhetoric that it's going to change everything, and suddenly the whole, you're seeing Warner and some of the majors invest in these entities, but I don't know. I still think there'll be a classic ecosystem of royalties and artist rights and contracts that will still, at least overlay some part of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I don't necessarily buy into that it'll change everything. There'll always be a venue or a place in our world for live music, and there's really nothing like that connection going in live. So I think this is just an advancement. We've seen it in many other ways. Zoom being a great example of, we're not able to be with each other in person, but at least we can, interact with each other and see each other's faces, get each other's body language a little bit over Zoom. I think that's happening in the music world, and for artists to be able to have that platform. And I think it was Nick in the chat who said, connect with people where they're hanging out. People are hanging out online. People love hanging out online. So that's a great place for us to connect with them. But yeah, for me, especially being kind of a music nerd in that way, is like, I don't think anything is ever going to replace, going to a live show. Can you get chills from watching something online? Maybe, but I don't know. It's not like being in person and being able to kind of connect with the artist that way.
No, but your world, or Tipalti's world, is about payments, right? And money, and perhaps royalties, if you will. But so, I mean, people are buying stuff in this landscape, right? I mean, whether they're pixels or gifts or NFTs, or whatever they might be. Give us a little sense on, you're a pretty broad-based company, right? You operate in lots of different verticals, not just music. You're looking at it as a new one. What's sort of the opening that you're thinking about, and why you come in at the music sector versus perhaps others that are out there?
Yeah, for sure. And as I said in my intro, the more complicated, the better. And I don't think payments gets more complicated than in the music space. And I think Paul knows this probably even better than I do, because I'm really just learning and teaching myself about some of the complicated disbursement structures that happen in the royalties and music space overall. But yeah, Tipalti is industry agnostic. We can help all different sorts of companies with managing their outbound payments. We really focus on the outbound side, so what is traditionally accounts payable, and what we really call global partner payments is the area that we focus on. And the reason we call it global partner payments is, if you think about a royalty disbursement, let's say Seth, Paul, and I have a band, right? And Seth is the lead singer, Paul's the guitarist, and I do the keys or something like that. We all are entitled to a bite of that pie when people stream our music on Spotify, or stream our music on Apple Music, or download our concert on YouTube, or whatever it might be. But how do you ensure that those payments are getting dispersed properly? Maybe we have a deal where 50% goes to Paul, or 50% goes to Seth, 25% to Paul, 25% to Evan. But how do we make sure that that's getting into the right people's hands? And how do we make sure that it's done in an on-time, accurate way? That's really where Tipalti can come in and help you with that, that organization. One of the big things that Paul and I have talked extensively about is, like, people often wait months, if not years, for payments that they're owed on royalties. So it's something that that Tipalti is really interested in helping music companies get better at. And really the way that we approach it is thinking about making it as organized, as structured as possible. And the global piece is critical. We could all be based in different places around the globe, wanting to be paid out in different currencies. And that's something that Tipalti can do really, really well, is we cover 196 countries, 120 currencies, and it makes it easy for us to help you out if you have artists all across the world, or creators all across the world, all collaborating.
Yeah, and we were talking before, earlier in the week, just about some of the spots in the market, but you've got some pretty interesting examples. I want to say you've worked with some collaborative music communities. Splice is one, I think you mentioned. TuneIn is another. These are, maybe you can speak a little bit to that, because I think it will inform some of the thinking around why the payment solution is an important spot in the market that maybe isn't covered everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And Splice is a great example. I mean, Splice is a place where people can go and license out the products, or license out the beats or specific sounds or full pieces of music that they're creating. And what Splice does is it kind of gives an opportunity to have an open marketplace where if you're an artist, you can license out these awesome beats or sounds that people are making from across the globe. And what makes it really, really easy and a great experience, if you're a creator on Splice, then it makes it really easy for you to get paid for the folks that are taking advantage of things that you're using. So let's say I create something on Splice, and Seth, you use it in the United States to be part of your song. You list that song on Spotify, it gets 2 million plays because it's an awesome song. Splice has an easy ability to pay out to me. Let's say I'm based in Israel, and they have an easy ability to pay out to me for all the work that I did in making your song great. Another example, not in the music industry, but a really, really easy one to think about is Twitch. Tipalti pays all of the streamers on Twitch. So being able to understand how, if you're streaming in the United States, if you're streaming in the UK, if you're streaming wherever you are, Twitch has a methodology to pay you out, and using Tipalti is their choice method. So it's really interesting from that perspective.
Do you see it? Not only go too deep into payments, I think. I'll bore everyone if we start going into all the questions I can ask on it, but there's obviously different sizes of payments. There's, I guess, lower value payments. You can buy a stick of gum or whatever it is, or buy a car. I mean, are you sort of any spot in the landscape that Tipalti is sort of more commonly focused on, lower value payments, or all across the board?
We can help all across the board. I mean, I think the way to think about it is, if you're reaching a volume of payments where you're paying tens, hundreds, or even thousands of people per month, and it's just becoming something that's a drag on your time, where you have a single person that's managing all that, or it's taking you hours and hours to manage all of that. You don't have any visibility. You're running an Excel spreadsheet. That's when you start thinking about a solution like Tipalti, but really can help, up and down the chain. We've been working with companies like Twitch for going on 5 years or so. So it can be any really size. It's just that ability to introduce that flexibility into people's platforms.
And then, like if, just maybe to zip in on the record industry, I mean, if you think about some of the bigger DSPs, a Spotify or an Amazon, maybe those pathways are kind of already set up, if you will, but maybe some of these emerging markets like we're speaking about might be perhaps more fruitful spots in the landscape: gaming, social, Web 3.0, metaverse, all the new stuff. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I mean, I think Tipalti is designed for kind of small and medium-sized businesses because it's designed for you to scale with us. So starting small is sort of our recommendation. And then as you add more folks to your platform, more and more partners to your platform to create more beats or whatever it is that you offer, then you have an easy system to do that through. And even with Tipalti, you can handle the onboarding. So if you're a brand new payee, you can do the onboarding right onto Splice's platform using Tipalti.
This is kind of a softer, maybe even more theoretical question, but just with all of the publicity and public outcry from artists, and there's been, Paul and I were talking earlier just about the enormous number of artists on Spotify. Who generates the most streams? The question of compensation always comes up. It's usually a really kind of negative story, particularly from the artist perspective, indefensible if you're looking at it from a streaming perspective, I think. But is this, do you think Tipalti can in some way change that or help, somehow empower or perhaps better the compensation or the standing of artists or other enterprises or businesses that would use the solution out in the market?
Well, certainly we're hoping that that's something that we can do. We want to create that visibility for the artist. The artist is often left in limbo in terms of when is their payment coming? Is it going to be right? Are they going to have to, throw a fit to make sure that, the companies that they're working with are paying them accurately? Or are they going to have to, track everything themselves? Tipalti likes to take away some of that complexity. So that's how I would address that as well.
Yeah, Paul, you're nodding your head there. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, it seems like there's like two sides to that coin too, because one is, you can have a perfect Tipalti system set up, but it wouldn't fix the issue that you described earlier, which is what's the actual payment coming across. It's almost when you go over to Splice, I see opportunity, you've made a beat, you've made a track, and then you get paid for it, and that's great. there's so much less expectation there. The price is great. You're making money suddenly off of that. But with Spotify, I'm not sure the issue is as closely aligned to getting paid. It's once the check comes, you're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah,
So,
right.
yeah.
Well, I guess I guess what I'm driving at, I mean, it's for sure there's a big ecosystem, and you can't go in and rip the whole thing up and change it up with any one element or tool, I guess. But I think with some of these new channels, I don't know if you believe it or not, but there is this argument that whether it's Web3 and Deborah Newman has asked a good question about what the heck we mean by that. We can go into that in a second, but that some of these new channels, whether it's Twitch or blockchain, NFTs, independent artist economies, somehow could change the game a bit. Clearer accounting for sure. Maybe moving away from record labels as the centerpiece of it. This seems like something that could fit into that ecosystem to me, to have a payment solution as part of a new enterprise. Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of areas that go sort of beyond digital and predate digital for decades that have major payment problems associated with them. Just look at performance royalties. I'm still hearing that artists, songwriters, and composers have to wait 90 plus days, excuse me, to get a payment on a song that played in an elevator somewhere in Idaho. And that may have made sense back in 1992 or something, but now it's becoming harder to defend that sort of lag. So you have all these micropayments going on, and then it sort of has to winnow through, and it's this estimate, that estimate. By the time you actually get a payment, it's hard to tell what it's for, when it happened, what actually went down. And there's even the Tipalti of PROs working to shed more light in that area and start to count tracks more equitably and more accurately, and just make sure that when you get paid, it's Tipalti can get you the payment, or a payment processing company can get you the payment, but then you can also see what it's for, when the track played, and it's actually more related to reality. So there are many opportunities that go beyond Web3 and all the newfangled platforms.
Yeah. I
Mhm.
mean, Evan, some of the industries you work in, maybe outside of music, I don't know if there are
Yeah.
any interesting examples. I mean, you probably operate in things like banking or all sorts of other securities, I don't know, but are there other examples where you've got to change the game a little bit, perhaps, or just intellectually, just curious on it?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the biggest thing that our company is set out to do, and I sort of mentioned at the top, is, we want to handle your payments. And I think the biggest thing is, converting over from having a analog way to handle payments to more of a digital way. In a lot of ways, Tipalti is kind of a digital bank. We replace many of the relationships that you might need to have. So as a business, even Paul's business as an example, you might be advertising with folks, or having folks advertise with you that are from all different kinds of countries and different continents across the world. How do you work with them? Are you sending them all checks? Are you sending them wires? Are you sending them ACHs? Are you using PayPal? Having the ability to kind of consolidate that all into one relationship with Tipalti is the way that we look at the world, and we look at making your lives easier. It's all about automation today. And I think if you can find a way to do something in a third or a fourth or even a fifth of the amount of time that you were previously doing it, then that's a huge win. Your team can move on to more strategic initiatives. You can work on scaling your business even further. So that's really where Tipalti positions ourselves as, moving the envelope forward, or pushing the envelope forward in terms of payments in general.
If you're looking at like a business model with payments, say you're a vendor or whatever the legal definition is in some way, or you have intellectual property, you want to sell pixels, whatever it might be, there's got to be a cost associated with not just the payment, but the whole network to make it happen. So presumably, I don't know if Tipalti does this, but you can probably bundle payments in a bigger way, so it's a much more efficient, perhaps lower cost, and maybe you're helping the business model. Is that a fair thought?
Totally. Yeah. And you can set it up in an easy way to, if you have 900 royalty payments to make at the end of a month or something like that, you don't need to make each one of those individually. You just set it up in a way that you have, the information feeding into Tipalti that lets you know how much Seth is owed, how much Paul is owed, how much Evan is owed. And it's kind of a one click of the button from there. So yeah, there, of course, with any software, there is some setup, but it's pretty seamless in terms of just feeding the correct data. And there was a good question in the chat that I had answered around, can Tipalti partner with BMI, or so can some of the data providers around royalty payments and royalty spend. And the answer is yes. If you feed the data in properly, then we can make sure that that's getting passed along and being calculated properly and being dispersed in the right ways.
I got to think the enterprise model. So you're a white label, right? You'll work with,
Yep.
You don't have to be branded. Tipalti lends itself to a lot of good partners. I've seen it in Latin America with frankly all three of the major labels, looking at some of the markets. Sorry for my voice. And you can question pricing, whether you can legally change pricing or not, and say, gee, I think an all-you-can-eat streaming service should be $15.99 instead of $13.99, or I think this package of hits should be in the market for the equivalent of $5 basically. And you know what? I don't have the ability to tell a streaming service what to do. That I'm just licensing my right, but maybe I can set up my own business. So the notion of like direct to consumer or D2C businesses, I've seen like ample precedent for in international markets. And this is a really good part of the structure that I have in place to bring a payment solution to that, particularly if it's cheaper. So I've seen that. And I wonder if like payment networks, I don't know, Visa, MasterCard, or even some of the entities that work just with like run the banking or ATM systems behind the scenes, if those are things that could be partners of Tipalti, part of your ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the easy answer there is like a lot of people are working on digital credit cards, and that's something that's been an emerging, makes businesses' lives a whole lot easier to be able to, instead of a physical card needing to run that on the spot, being able to use a digital credit card to make purchases, whether big or small. And that's something that, obviously you need to have the right relationships, whether it's a Visa or MasterCard, to kind of guarantee the rails behind something like that. But what's a cool thing about Tipalti is that we own our own payment rails. So across the United States and emerging in some places in Europe, we have the ability to be a licensed money transmitter. So that gives us the ability to, be unique from some of our competitors in terms of how we can manage the payment process end to end. And yeah, I mean, look out on the horizon for some cool things coming out, not only around, credit cards and things like that, but also we've been investigating how do we get involved into that crypto market. Obviously the whole nature of crypto payments is deregulated, and that's something that is tricky for a business like Tipalti that is a licensed money transmitter and needs to be regulated. But I think as the world pushes forward, that's going to be something that people demand, even businesses demanding to have the option to pay out in crypto to their clients that want it. So something that we're looking at, and a lot of forward looking things. You see how products like Stripe, like Venmo, like and those two just being two great examples of how they've shaken up the payments industry so quickly. I think Venmo is a ubiquitous word. It's like, did you Venmo me? Just like, did you take an Uber here? It's like it's becoming a ubiquitous word, and for us in the business world, we'd love to have that same thing happen with Tipalti. It's like, did you Tipalti them, or did you? So that's something that we're working towards, and making sure that we can address all of the potential scenarios where payments might be needed for a business is something that we're working towards. And there's a lot of gaps.
So this is kind of a DOI top level question, if you will, but I mean, are you focused on just traditional currencies like US dollars and foreign currencies? You mentioned crypto. Is that sort of a different sort of threshold point?
That's an aspiration for sure. Crypto is an aspiration. Not there by any means yet. We're a completely regulated property, so it's all fiat currencies, and fiat currency just really means US dollars, Canadian, blah blah blah. So
this is the point in the discussion where someone has to bring up NFTs or this whole world of blockchain distribution. So I don't know, and Paul, feel free to pipe up here as well. But what's not so much just around the payments, but what's sort of your top level view on this whole new world of NFTs? What do you think about it?
Well, before I go into that, because there's a lot to talk about there, but it's funny you mentioned payments around streaming services. So a huge eye opener for me, is I started to realize that we're just talking about emerging markets for streaming platforms. Well, a lot of times the payment behaviors of people that live in different countries are radically different than what you might see in, let's say, Western Europe or United States
Definitely.
or something like that. So I'll give you an example. Just recently in Thailand, a streaming platform named Plurn emerged. This was probably October, November of last year. And hey, it's been blowing up, doing really well. They started to creep up the charts. They became a top app and they're suddenly on the stage. And it turns out that one of their approaches to differentiate from the big elephants like Spotify and Apple Music was just to cater to the actual payment behaviors of actual Thai people. And it turned out that a lot of Thai people don't want to do a monthly subscription. They want to do a top-up plan on their phone. So the billing mechanism right there is with their payment provider or with some other convenience store in Bangkok somewhere. So for them, that was one recipe for success. And then there's huge behavior differences for them, depending on whether or not they're in a Wi-Fi rich environment at an office or they're on the bus. Whereas, in the United States, there's far less distinction there. So you start to see these big differences in how people approach, and even culturally, some places have a very different orientation towards just a monthly payment. So yeah, there's a lot of complexity out there as streaming starts to saturate.
No, definitely. I've done quite a bit of work in Latin America, and a lot of digital consumption, as it is here, is around the mobile phone, and that market is typically prepaid. 2/3, I think, still don't. They do their top ups, they pay as you go. And if you've been to Bogota or places like Buenos Aires, you see people sometimes lined up at the Claro office, the Telefónica, to actually pay their bills. Quite old school, actually. And it's an important distinction and to think about in terms of how people will pay for products, And I actually think it supports some of these alternative currencies that we're touching on that Evan's mentioning a little bit. But it's a huge distinction in terms of that, as is pricing, basically, which is why I think payment systems and the D2C model in general, at Sony, where I spent, I know you worked at Epic too, Paul. We would look at certain markets almost as lost markets. Like if you looked at no disrespect, say, pick a market like Peru or Bolivia, where the country itself may say, we support copyrights and we're part of a copyright convention, meaning we'll respect it. But the actual country may not support it at all. There's piracy all over the place, physical or digital. And so you need to figure out like how to price things better, more strategically. And why would you let Spotify come in and define that, or Apple, or even the mobile carriers? So I think sort of these independent means to create your own business with pricing, it can be important sticks to have in the market. Actually, that's how I've seen it. It's quite positive. But I wanted to touch on NFTs. I'm happy to give you my view on it, but
right.
let me hear some of your karma on it. Okay, I'm not gonna let you go on that one.
Well, it's funny. I was just walking down 11th Street here in Santa Monica, and I saw a guy with a sweatshirt right across the front that NFTs are a scam. And yeah, there's a grain of truth to that. I think it's going to be really interesting. I was over at Muse Expo in Burbank, and one of the panel questions was, will NFTs be around in 10 years? And show of hands, 5 years. So who knows what's going on there. One of the funny things I've noticed about NFTs is that sort of the low grade scams are kind of going on, the sketchy gray area scams are going on in the music industry prior to the NFTs coming along have now gotten totally blown away, because I was like, everyone's rushing towards NFTs. So legit, illegit, whatever it is, all the attention for anyone that wants to cash out, make a lot of money, do something is shifting there. So it's like all the attention, it's a total attention hog.
Yeah. It's funny. I didn't know we probably lived near each other. I lived near 11th Street too, and I think I saw a guy with a T-shirt that said VR is BS a couple of years ago. Yeah.
He's actually selling this
basically.
Yeah.
Evan, have you touched sort of this world that we're talking about a little bit with the NFT stuff at all? Or?
Yeah, for us, we're kind of on the fence. We're sort of waiting to see what happens. And for me personally, The application that I see that is sort of interesting is, for example, everyone has TVs in their home, but are those TVs always being used? Maybe, maybe not. Wouldn't it be cool to have, some sort of cool digital art that you could just display on your screen instead of, using it for, every once in a while to watch TV when you don't want to watch the same thing that your wife is watching or that your kids are watching or something like that. And I know for us personally, our TV died up in the main living room that we have. And it's like, I don't even want to replace that TV. I'd almost rather put a piece of art there or a piece of digital art. So from that perspective, personally, I think it has some cool applications. But overall, in terms of business, I think it's tricky. I think the one area that is really interesting is, monetizing NFTs through wallets. A lot of the ways that you need to purchase these NFTs is through specific wallets and through specific, creating your own wallet for Bored Ape or creating your own wallet for Top Shot or whatever, NFT collectible you're getting involved with. So I think there's a lot going on in each of those channels and avenues that it gets very complicated very quickly. And just thinking about it logistically, that's a lot to manage if you're a consumer managing multiple different wallets. So I think if there's a way to do a little bit of a better job of understanding how those can be aggregated, that would be really interesting if there was like a main wallet you could use. And I see Debbie Newman asking about like, what is a wallet, and really what that means is just a way for you to make a purchase. You can't purchase NFTs with fiat currencies and USD most of the time. You have to use their standard currency. So if it's like you're on Roblox or something like that, and there's a special Roblox NFT that you want to purchase, you need to use their currency. So there's a lot around, just being able to participate that makes the barriers to entry a little bit higher. And there's that educational piece that needs to happen too, for people to feel like they're participating in that world.
So the bulk of NFTs are tied at whatever the platform's discretion is to a Bitcoin type currency, whatever it might be, if not to the US dollar or to a traditional currency.
A lot of the time, yes. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to get involved with NFTs, and I think there's going to be more and more ways over the next few years. But a lot of the times, that's exactly right. It's like you need to have your own. You need to be transacting in the ways that these NFT sellers are making it available.
From the music perspective, I mean, I'm probably a little old school. It seems closer to like the fan club model to me, with merchandise, and whether it's virtual merchandise than anything. But I think with maybe what everyone's kicking around and kicking in the chat here, I got to look at it much more broadly. I think it's what it is what we're saying here.
Well, Seth, one thing I would flag here, which is I'm watching this thing just emerging, but on Spotify, this NFTs could become a problem for Spotify. Not sure where this is going to go, but I don't know. Not sure if anyone really saw this happen, but suddenly at least two major albums from the Death Row Records catalog suddenly just disappeared from Spotify. The Chronic, Doggy Style.
Mm-hmm.
There might be others, and all this. Everyone's sort of trying to put the pieces together on what's going on here, but it looks like Snoop Dogg is the one orchestrating this removal, right? So what's going to happen next? Well, Snoop Dogg is a preeminent, if not the preeminent NFT entrepreneur out there, minting hundreds of millions, if not billions on this game so far. So are we going to see these albums reissued as collectible NFTs? Quite possibly. And of course, one of the reasons why I think that is because there seems to be some issue with creating more scarcity around these albums, right? Of course, if you remove these albums from streaming services, there's theoretically more scarcity, or certainly it's harder to access these albums, therefore potentially boosting the value of an NFT album. So this has all been really quiet. Like there's really nobody really knows where this is going to go, but just advancing this one step into the future, what Snoop Dogg releasing an NFT album with a classic Death Row album, that's pretty huge. Would others follow that? Would others start saying, oh, I'm not really making any money off of Spotify, going back to your earlier comment about compensation. why don't I remove my classic album from Spotify and re-release it as an NFT? And by the way, from Apple Music and Deezer and Amazon Music Unlimited, etc. So, hey, this can go in a lot of wild places, and that is potentially one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to have rights, obviously, just to state the obvious for that. And there's, publishers, maybe that had to do with all the writers that are in it. If anyone's ever done a hip hop track clearance or a reggaeton clearance, this is not necessarily something that just, it's a lot of work doing that. But the thing that
you have the rights though. So yeah, you have the rights. There are a lot of people selling their catalogs, right? They have the rights to do that.
Well, but yeah, I mean, the other thing is just, like if you look back, I teach a class here to young aspiring music students in a university here. And I'm always trying, all they ask about is NFTs these days. Like there's a whole, the younger generations don't seem to even appreciate how we kind of got here, which is fine. But like there was a period of time before digital music became a real business, when it was so clotted up with complex digital propositions that consumers, the press, everyone just laughed at us. Digital downloads that weren't operable with each other, that were awkwardly priced. Buy something at one store, it doesn't work in the other. Tons of free piracy. It took a guy named Steve Jobs and his team to come in actually to put something together that was really simple, easily priced. And I still think there's something to be said for a great user experience that's done in an easy, reasonably priced way. And I don't know. I mean, just listening to all these things, it feels to me like it's so far off of that, but maybe that's just me.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, right? Because in the early days of digital, the major labels actually tried to create the very early, Pong version, what we see.
Press play or,
Press play was one of them. And one of the big reasons they fail it's exactly the reasons that you were outlining, the interoperability problem, DRM. I was there trying all this stuff out, and it was headache inducing. But wow, now that everything is advanced and it's 15 years later or 20 years later, I wonder if the labels are thinking about doing something again, maybe jumping back in, because now they know how to do it. There's interoperability, the DRM issues have been sorted out. Consumers know what it is. So, hey, there are a lot of things that can happen on that front. But yeah, it's now that everything is sorted out, who knows? They could jump back in.
I mean, it feels closer to me to maybe the early days of digital downloading, when there's so many different platforms and solutions in the market. I mean, the NFT platform business to me, I think I've had a half dozen discussions in the last 6 months, and half of the companies are already gone, for whatever reasons, or repositioning themselves. So it feels like the market needs to have enough demand to satisfy all these solutions that are out there. But if I was at a label, I'd certainly be looking at this, or maybe even testing it, basically.
Oh yeah,
and I think that's what's happening. Like Genie's, all three of the majors have at least tested in some way, right?
Oh yeah, Universal Music Group dropped I forgot the amount, like $380,000 on a board. I think it was a Bored Ape avatar. They're starting a band, man. And when you've got Universal Music Group money, is whatever, man. Just throw 380K in there, see if it happens. It might be big. But why not dabble? There's no reason not to if you've got the cash.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other businesses outside of this, live streaming, gaming businesses. There's AI businesses. There's a ton of really interesting stuff, financing platforms that I would probably also want to put my chips into as well. The thing that troubles me is just, and Evan, it's sort of your comment, that no judgment, but just the link to crypto and virtual currencies, and there's a lot of hype around it. It starts getting, a little troubling just in terms of thinking about it rationally. So we have I guess 5 more minutes before we cut this off, but there's a lot of great questions out there. I saw one about not just currency support, but sort of local complexities around your platform, Evan. I want to say, can you handle taxes around the world and all the different local financial complexities in every territory? Maybe a little bit of view on that.
Yeah, right now, really our tax capabilities are deepest in the United States. So we have a KPMG approved tax compliant solution in the United States, and that helps you generate all the tax forms that you need at year end. So think about a company like Splice that has, thousands and thousands of contributors on their platform on a on an annual basis, we can help them generate all the 1099s that they need for those contract workers. So that's one thing that makes it really easy. Tax compliance globally, we definitely have the ability to help you mitigate fraud and mitigate risk, but still building up some of the specifics around compliance in other countries when it comes to, you know, tax filing and things like that.
Yeah, I had a good point from Jane Poteet just about some of the really bigger traditional financial interests. JP Morgan, Visa, now starting to test and embrace virtual currencies and NFTs as well. You see some of the really big ones getting off the bench, if you will, and coming to play in this space as well. Or
I mean, it's hard to predict. I think that there is the potential for it, but like we said, you know, is all of this stuff going to be around? Like, I think Bitcoin, cryptos, those are here to stay, but you know, the applications for them are still very hazy. So I think that's what we're really going to find out over the next 3 to 5 years is what are the applications for these digital currencies, for these other types of non-fiat and just non-traditional, you know, US dollar, yen, whatever it might be. What are the applications for them, and in what areas are we going to see them needed and used most frequently?
yeah, we already have, just looking at some last questions before we close off. Basically, Nick Blake asked a question early in the session just about some of the bigger artists, you know, selling their rights and out there, and just asking if it's if the labels or other rights holders use the word desperate for ways to make some more money, you know, and aren't streaming services satisfying their needs? Good question, Nick. And you know, my take on that, I don't think that they're desperate anymore. I think what we're saying, and Paul spoke to it a little bit, is just the tide is higher now with subscription and advertising streaming out there. So I think some of the rights holders have the ability to really test some new markets that are out there. So I don't know if it's desperate as much as it is, you know, being comfortable and being able to test the market, be opportunistic a little bit, basically. So.
Well, I will say this to answer, to touch upon that question, for some artists that there is a desperation going on, and it is David Crosby, I think, said it out loud pretty blatantly that the pandemic cut all of his touring possibilities, and then that sort of threw him back to his Spotify royalties, which were nothing spectacular. And hey, you know, he should have a good savings account, but maybe he doesn't, I don't know, but he was forced to sell a lot of his catalog. And yeah, so sometimes that is the story.
Yeah. Nick.
I think it's interesting too to go
ahead.
back to, sorry, Seth, just to one thing that Paul was mentioning earlier around, you know, having people like Snoop Dogg and you know, the whole team that made some of those iconic albums pull off of Spotify. You see it with like a guy like Kanye West, you know, only way to listen to his new album is to buy his $200 stem player. I'm a huge Kanye fan, but I'm not buying that $200 stem player. So there has to be some sort of middle ground.
Not a real fan, man.
Obviously not, apparently not.
I've
No,
heard
I think Nick
not
was,
even that
I was,
good anyway. So
yeah,
I mean,
think
it's
Nick,
fine, but
go ahead.
Go ahead,
Go ahead. I think Nick was asking us about labels and publishers, but I don't think there's
Yep.
I do think from the artist perspective, and it was interesting reading Music Business this morning, just you know, the enormous numbers of artists that are on Spotify, you know, and how you break through, you know, and how you get discoveries. Another thing we could do a whole panel on, basically. There is arguably a little too much that's out there. So how you break through that is a good question. So
one thing.
All right, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, are we getting the
Just about, you can get the last comment. Go ahead.
Okay. One thing, sometimes the Spotify question just doesn't matter for certain artists. And then what I mean by that is take a rapper, Russ, for example. Okay, he used to be signed to Atlantic, which is Warner Music Group. He split off from them. He's got a not a cult following, a big following. He doesn't get all the splashy playlisting on Spotify. You know, he makes money and he's got a good release strategy, but yeah, he can fill amphitheaters from what I've heard. So for him, yeah, hey, Spotify money is great, but he needs to be there. He's got to be on Spotify, and that, you know, if you want to check out Russ, go to Spotify. But that's just what the music fan wants. But the more important thing for him is filling amphitheaters and then selling merchandise and selling a book. You know, he's doing all these other things.
Yeah, and hopefully that business comes back. I didn't even touch on live streaming, but that was one of the things I was going to say. Well, that survived as well. But I think we're we do this very tightly. So I want to thank Ned and Emma at the gang, at the DEW gang, and Evan and Paul. It was great talking with you both. Paul, we have no excuse. We have to meet each other at some point. Okay. I know in LA people always say that and don't actually do it, but we're going to do it. Okay.
That's the thing. If in LA, if you go definitely is code word for no. So I'm not going to
okay.
definitely. Okay. No.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Definitely, maybe, according to my favorite band. All right, gang. Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone out there for your questions. I know we only got a couple to them. Have a great weekend. It's Oscar weekend out here, so it's a big one in LA. And hopefully my voice will recover for next week. Thank you very much, Ned and Emma.
Appreciate it. Great job moderating. Paul, great to see you again. Have you on the show. And Evan, fantastic having you guys. Appreciate you guys putting this together for us today. All the folks over at Tipalti. And then to the audience, you guys are always fantastic, but really appreciated all the engagement today and smart, intelligent questions. So have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.
Thanks all.